But let me start with an observation about the drought. It is crippling, it is severe, one of our worst, at least in a generation, and we want everything possible done to help affected communities until the rains come again. But the way politicians and activists have used the drought to push their global warming barrow has been disgusting in my view. And I want to highlight a particular case that exposes all this quite dramatically. I've touched on it before, and I could have left this for Kenny on media tomorrow night, but it's important to call this stuff out as soon as possible. It highlights how deceptive and disingenuous leftist politicians and green left journalists can be on climate change. You pay for many of these green left journalists, by the way, at the ABC, of course, and your tax dollars are spent on spin, self-censorship, climate alarmism and deception instead of honest, clear and factual reporting. At your expense, the ABC has broadcast slurs against this station, against me, against Alan Jones and Andrew Bolt, and they've done it based on half-truths and their own climate alarmist bias without, mind you, ever coming to us for the facts. It's all about us having the audacity to share with you the exact words spoken by a leading climate scientist. Yet here's Paul Barry at the ABC.
But seems Bolt, Kenny and Jones have blocked their ears because they're still treating Pittman's original quote as gospel, as we saw when Chris Kenny, for the second time in his show, played it to Labour's Matt Thistlethwaite.
The leading scientist in this area is Professor Andy Pittman from the University of New South Wales, and he makes very, very clear that there is absolutely no evidence that links the current drought to climate change. Matt Thistlethwaite, do you agree that you're wrong to try and associate bushfires and drought now with climate change?
Well, no, he did not agree, and no, he was not wrong. But why let the facts, or a clarification from the scientist you're quoting, spoil a good rant?
Well, of course, it's Barry that's wrong, and the facts are actually very clear, and the scientist won't talk. Now, The Guardian has picked up on the ABC's lead here, and it's also falsely accusing me and others of misrepresentation. Headed climate scientist says Sky News commentators misrepresented his views on drought. The article goes on to say a leading Australian climate scientist has said his views have been misrepresented by conservative media commentators who have used a misspoken statement to dismiss the links between climate change and drought. Well, you'll hear the so-called misspoken statement in full in just a moment. But the editor of The Guardian, Lenore Taylor, another leading climate alarmist and media campaigner on this issue, pushed out the line on Twitter too, wondering if the Sky News commentators would now stop their misrepresentations. And Kevin Rudd, once a climate change crusader, then the PM who dropped his emissions trading scheme rather than go to a double dissolution election, but now trying to be a climate crusader again, apparently. Well, Rudd also chimed in on Twitter, ranting about lies, misinformation, Fox News and royal commissions. He might be close to another meltdown, I think, Kevin Rudd. So what do they hang their accusations on? Well, firstly, we've allowed you to hear what Professor Andy Pittman said in a Sydney University forum in June. Here's the preeminent climate scientist's assessment for the fourth or fifth time on my programs, talking about the claimed link between drought and global warming.
This may not be what you expect to hear, but as far as the climate scientists know, there is no link between climate change and drought. Now, that may not be what you read in the newspapers and sometimes hear commented, but there is no reason a priori why climate change should make the landscape more arid. And if you look at the Bureau of Meteorology data over the whole of the last 100 years, there's no trend in data. There is no drying trend. There's been a drying trend in the last 20 years, but there's been no drying trend in the last 100 years, and that's an expression of how variable the Australian rainfall climate is.
Very clear, very reasoned and factual, isn't it? Now, the ABC did not report this at the time. The Guardian did not report this at the time. Climate change is a huge issue for these media organisations. The crippling drought, of course, is the dominant national challenge of the moment. Lots of politicians and journalists are running around linking the drought to global warming, yet the ABC and The Guardian did not share this expert view explaining there was no link. The ABC and The Guardian self-censored. They kept the science from people because the science doesn't fit their political and climate alarmist narrative. That is scandalous. Instead, they attack us for broadcasting the comments to you. The peg they hang their criticism on is a statement put out by Professor Pittman's Climate Centre, later repeated by him, saying he should have said no direct link instead of no link. You heard his full assessment. The addition of that word changes little, if anything. We also know we've had worse droughts a century ago. Yet on the back of this, instead of sharing the facts with their audiences, the ABC and The Guardian still spread lines about this station being misleading. Well, I can tell you this. Apart from sharing Professor Pittman's comments many times and IPCC findings about how climate change on average will increase runoff from rivers around the world, I've repeatedly contacted Professor Pittman's centre and invited him onto this television station for an interview. He has repeatedly declined, and neither he nor his staff have once suggested that I have misrepresented them. Of course they couldn't, because I haven't. Playing Professor Pittman's words is not misrepresenting him. Yet The Guardian has published this. Asked if he felt his views were being misrepresented, Pittman said, absolutely yes, but it's understandable from my statement that some people misunderstood what I was saying. Clearly, Professor Pittman is feeling the heat. But I repeat, he's knocked back my interview requests, live to air, unedited, and he's never complained about any coverage. Indeed, have a look at what else he told The Guardian. Pittman said he couldn't answer a question on whether the current drought gripping large areas of southeast Australia had been influenced by climate change. But the fact that I can't establish something does not make it true or false. It just means I can't establish it, said Professor Pittman. Again, he has reaffirmed the key point. The leading scientist in the field cannot make a link between the drought and global warming, a link that politicians, activists and journalists are pretending exists day in and day out. He is consistent and he is clear, and he is not misreported here, but at the ABC and elsewhere. The Guardian Australia, the ABC, Paul Barry, Lenore Taylor, Kevin Rudd, the whole lot of them don't want you to know about this crucial bit of information, except in an attempt to attack Sky News so they can pretend Professor Pittman's saying something different to what he's actually said. They don't seem to like fact-based debate. They are climate science fact deniers. They pathetically attack people like me because at Sky News we think Professor Andrew Pittman is smart enough to have his expert opinions broadcast on the airwaves, and you are smart enough to make of them what you will.